What is a sitcom? What does sitcom mean?
Situational comedy.
Situational comedy. In other words, we're going to take a bunch of stock standard characters, archetypal characters, and we're going to put them in different situations each week and just watch what happens. The origin of sitcom, anyone know what the origin of sitcom is? Where it originally came from? It actually comes from commedia dell'arte, the Italian masking, like the Italian form of theater, which involves masks. Because what would happen like 200 or 300 years ago would be there'd be these traveling players who would go from village to village, putting on these shows, and each of the actors would take on a different persona that would be associated with a mask. And depending on what mask they were wearing, the audience could automatically recognize that character as an archetypal character like Arlecchino or Brighella or Il Dottore or Il Capitan. And it didn't matter if they were completely different troupes of actors, the audience knew exactly who those characters were. And there were certain types of behavior that would be associated with that character archetype. So if you put Arlecchino and Brighella in a scene, only so many things could happen. Or Il Capitan and, Il Dottore. So it would be the same characters just in different situations, and then only so many things could really happen. Today, we kind of have the same thing in sitcoms. We've got archetypal characters that we put in different situations each week. Usually in a sitcom, though, the characters are united by what we call a precinct. In other words, there's some place in sitcoms that usually the characters will gather. Either if it's The Office, they gather at the office. If it's like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, then they gather at the police station. If it's Friends, it's in Monica's apartment. Or Seinfeld, Jerry's apartment. Does that make sense? And we do venture outside of those environments a bit, but for the most part, there's one central precinct. It's a little bit different now that there are more single cam comedies. So what's the difference between a 3-camera comedy and a single cam comedy? What's a 3-camera comedy? What's a 3-camera sitcom like?
Isn't that like live?
It's live. It's filmed live in front of a live studio audience. So what are some examples of 3-camera sitcoms? Seinfeld. Friends. Big Bang Theory. How I Met Your Mother.
Golden Girls.
The Golden Girls. Love the Golden Girls. Everybody Loves Raymond. And those were more typical of network TV, right? They were very returnable. You didn't have to watch every episode to be able to tune in because there's always a story of the week. When cable came along, we started to get the beginning of single cam comedy, which single cam comedies are shot kind of like the way a film is shot or a dramatic TV show on one camera. And it's usually shot on location. It doesn't have to just be on a soundstage. And it can take a lot longer to shoot. There's no live studio audience. So because in 3-camera sitcoms there's a live studio audience, what is the performance style like? It's big and theatrical because we're performing for the audience, for the back of the audience. And so the camera tends to sit back and kind of shoots the actors in mid-shots and wides. Very rarely are you in a close-up in a 3-camera sitcom. But in single-cam comedies, it suddenly allowed, performances to come in here as well. What are some examples of single-cam comedies? The Office. Scrubs. Parks and Rec. What else? Schitt's Creek. Arrested Development. Modern Family. Curb Your Enthusiasm. Does that make sense? What kind of single-cam comedy is The Office, Parks and Rec, Modern Family? It's called a mockumentary, right? And so what is a mockumentary? It is, but it's kind of like what? It's like shot like a documentary. It's kind of like a pretend documentary where the characters will talk to the camera and they will break the fourth wall. They'll look at the camera because they're aware of the fact that they're being filmed. Versus, let's say, Curb Your Enthusiasm, which has a kind of a documentary feel, but it's not a mockumentary. You know, Larry doesn't look at the camera. So they become very popular, mockumentaries. The first one, the original mockumentary, was This Is Spinal Tap, if anyone knows that film from the 1980s. Yeah, I just rewatched it. Funny film. Inside of the sitcoms, inside of comedies, there are also these archetypal characters. And I think a really great book that speaks about the different kinds of comedy characters there are to play is Scott Sedita's book, The 8 Characters of Comedy. Who knows that book? Anyone read that book? I'm going to very quickly give you what those 8 characters are. The first of the 8 characters is the logical smart one. So the logical smart character is the one who is smart and who is logical. And they tend to usually be more of a wavy line than a straight line, more of the straight guy in the scene. Does that make sense? They can usually see the problem with the idiots that they have to live with. Very often you'll find a lot of wives in sitcoms are logical smart ones, like Deborah in Everybody Loves Raymond, because they're married to idiots and they can usually see the problem with what their husband is doing. So Jerry in Seinfeld is a logical smart one, but he's also a bit of a neurotic. In fact, most of the cast of Seinfeld are neurotics. The second of the 8 characters is the lovable loser, which is exactly what it sounds like. A character who we love, but is a total loser. Lovable losers tend to go about doing things the wrong way. They screw things up. They can't get it right. They, no matter how hard they try, they always end up kind of being a loser. The third of the characters, the third character in the 8 characters, is the neurotic. So the neurotic is a character who overthinks, can be very anal retentive, can be quite nerdy. Ringing true for anyone? like my life. Yeah. Right. They're neurotic. They can be highly anxious and like to do things by a particular book. Does that make sense? There's like a rule book that we need to play by. And then when things are outside the rule book, they can freak out. They often don't have much of an inner monologue because they'll often speak it out loud. Does that make sense? And so neurotics can be nerdy or they can be anal retentive. And they kind of run the gamut from Carrie Bradshaw in Sex and the City through to Woody Allen in every Woody Allen film, to Ross in Friends. But Ross and Monica are 2 different ends of the neurotic. One is a nerd, one is anal retentive. Does that make sense? Then you've got the dumb one, Joey. Joey is a dumb one / womanizer. So the dumb one is a character who's very lovable because they're just not very bright. And there's an earnestness to them because they aren't very bright. They actually can be really optimistic characters. It's like life hasn't quite beaten them down yet.
Do they have to think they're smart though?
Yes. The dumb one often thinks that everybody else is dumb. And that they're the smart one. Does that make sense? Who knows people like that in life who actually think they're really smart and in actual fact the more smart they think they are, the dumber they come across. Then you've got the bitch bastard. The bitch bastard are usually pretty smart. They're very clever. They're really good with words. They're great at cutting you down to size. And they like putting people in their place. Because, again, they're surrounded by idiots. So an example of, a good example of a bitch might be Sue Sylvester from Glee. You know what I mean? She's like, she can be so cutting in what she says about the Glee Club. Or Blackadder, if anybody knows Blackadder, the Rowan Atkinson TV series from the 90s, 80s. God, I don't know how old I am. Often they are characters that, they're often the characters that have to do a lot of the work. You know, they don't, like in like Blackadder, for example, there are always people who are above him. There are always people who are in positions of power, and he's the one that's left having to, you know, serve these idiots. So there's a resentment there. They kind of are cynical about life and the way life beats them down. But that's what makes them so cutting. They can be the king and the queen of exit lines. Like they'll just cut you down and then they'll walk out. What's that? Karen in Will and Grace. Does that make sense? Then you've got the materialistic prince or princess, or the materialistic bitch bastard. The materialistic ones are the people who are completely obsessed with materialism. It's all about money for them. They're obsessed with money. Hey, Brady, how are you? So the materialistic ones, the prince, princess, the materialistic prince, princess, are characters who are actually quite lovely, and they can be quite sweet. It's just that they're totally oblivious to how life actually is for the vast majority of people, because they're living in the top 1%. So, you know, their problems are completely different to the problems of most normal people. They can be, as I said, they can be really sweet. Think Cher in Clueless. Who's seen Clueless? Yeah. With Alicia Silverstone. You know what I mean?
Character in Schitt's Creek, the daughter?
Alexis in Schitt's Creek is a princess. You know what I mean?
She's so funny.
But you also can have the materialistic bitch bastard. So they're really rich, but they're entitled, and they don't give a fuck about other people. They don't care. Think of Mr. Burns in The Simpsons. Does that make sense? Or Gina Reinhardt in real life. They don't give a damn. In fact, anyone seen Fargo season 5? Yeah. I would say that the mother in Fargo is a materialistic bitch. Then we have the womanizer, manizer. So the womanizer, manizer, it's all about sex. That's what's on their mind 24/7 is sex. Think Joey, because Joey is a womanizer, dumb one. Barney. And Samantha in Sex and the City. Yeah, Samantha in Sex and the City. It's all about sex. And finally, the 8th character is in their own universe. So a character who's in their own universe, they have a particular logic that makes sense to them, just not to everybody else. And one way to think of characters that are in their own universe, it's kind of like, it's like if they were an alien who arrived on planet Earth and they're just in their own world. Like it makes, again, it's like they're looking at life through these alien eyes. Phoebe and Friends. Phoebe is in her own universe. Kramer is in his own universe. And I would also probably argue that Michael Scott is in his own universe. So the comedy characters often, because they will do anything to win, can be really inherently self-centered and self-absorbed. Not every character, but a lot of them are. A lot of them get caught up in ego and needing to look good and that kind of thing. Does that make sense? And they cannot see the problem. Now, again, some characters can see the problem, like Michael in, is it Michael? What's Jason Bateman's character in Arrested Development? Michael Bluth. Michael Bluth in Arrested Development, he generally is the wavy line, right? He can see the problem. He's surrounded by a family full of idiots. And so he's constantly just having to deal with it. When you're the wavy line, the best way to play the wavy line is to react the way that you would react when you're dealing with an idiot. you just don't know what to do sometimes. Borat is what?
In his own world.
Borat's definitely in his own universe. And he's always, pretty much always, the straight line. Does that make sense? He cannot see the problem because he's from Kazakhstan. And they have a way of doing things in Kazakhstan. And everybody else in any scene with Borat gets turned into the wavy line. Because what he's doing is so far outside the norm of what is acceptable or politically correct behavior, that then you're just watching people try to figure out what to do. So when you're the wavy line, you don't have to try to be funny. You actually just have to see the problem. You just don't quite know what to do about it. And when you're the straight line, it's like you've got your blinders on. You're just oblivious. Does that make sense? Just a couple of other quick little thoughts. Inappropriate physicality and inappropriate emotion are what will help you escalate the comedy. Because comedy gives you permission to win at all costs, you can be inappropriately physical and you can be inappropriately emotional. Where a dramatic character will go to a 6 out of 10 emotionally, comedy characters will go to 10. Because if I go to 10 emotionally, it lacks dignity. Does that make sense? The dramatic character deals with it stoically. The comedy character goes to pieces. And the inappropriate physicality is great when you're playing a character who cannot see the problem with what you're doing. Does that make sense? Like if I just sat here while I'm talking to you and I was picking my nose at the same time, it would be inappropriate. But if I just can't see the problem with it, then it turns into comedy. And I keep talking and I keep doing whatever it is that I'm doing, it starts to become funny. So you've got all of that permission tonight. One other little idea that can be useful is metaphorical relationship. If you think about what your character's literal relationship is on the page, like let's say in Neil Simon's The Odd Couple, the two old guys are Felix and Oscar are literally flatmates, but the way they behave is like an old married couple. That's the metaphorical relationship. And so it gives them a way of being. Or in Flight of the Conchords, Brett and Jermaine kind of think of themselves like they're 10-year-old boys. And that's how they interact with each other. And so when they talk about sex, it's kind of funny, like it is to a 10-year-old. Or when they're talking to their manager, it's like they're being told off by the principal. Does that make sense? So all of a sudden it can give you another access point, another way of being in the scene that can be very funny. So, and finally, final tool I want to give you guys tonight, which you've all heard me say before, is the stop. That the stop is so powerful in comedy. That when you're hearing new information, particularly if you're the wavy line, you just let everything come to a stop, just for a second. And it will punctuate what the other person has just said. Fantastic. Like if you look at The Office, right? Michael does something crazy and you'll see Jim stop. And maybe he might even look to the camera. That's all he needs to do.